There is a particular silence that follows your presence now. It's not admiration, it's not fear, it's uncertainty. They don't know how you figured it all out, where you learned what they never meant to show. You've become the ghost in their systems, the name they whisper without knowing who taught you the language of shadows. You walk into rooms and their egos hold their breath, wondering if you know. And the problem? You do. You know too much. Not because someone taught you, but because you learned the hard way. You didn't just watch, you absorbed. You pieced together contradictions, read between silences, studied the art of hidden intentions, and stored it all in your quiet little vault. You are the result of 1,000 unnoticed observations, and they hate that your intelligence didn't come with a traceable diploma. You make them uncomfortable because you don't announce your knowledge, you let it drip. One comment, one look, one silence, and suddenly the facade starts cracking. They don't know what to defend against, because you never throw punches, you drop patterns. And that's what terrifies them. Patterns are permanent. You're not someone with an opinion, you're someone with receipts. And the source of your insight? That's the part that burns their sanity. Because it means your understanding didn't come from loyalty or intimacy, it came from strategy. While they were rehearsing their personas, you were mapping their inconsistencies. While they were crafting their illusions, you were cataloging every slip, every shift in tone, every phrase repeated too often. Your mind became a data center. Your silence, the server room. No one knows how you became this dangerous without ever being loud. They ask around, but no one can give a straight answer. Some say you studied psychology. Others think you were broken once and rebuilt wrong. But the truth? You were never broken. You were exposed. And you didn't cry about it. You watched. You studied people the way an arsonist studies wind patterns, with the quiet focus of someone waiting to set the whole system ablaze, not with rage, but with truth. You're not angry. You're calibrated. Your emotional detachment is mistaken for mystery, but really, it's precision. You don't overreact because you pre-calculated reactions. You've seen every mask they wear, and you know which ones are glued on and which are temporary. They can't trap you in games because you memorized the board before they knew it existed. The problem is, you're not predictable. You don't go from step 1 to 2 to 3, you skip, you jump, angles. You speak in truths laced with metaphors, and it forces them to think. That's what breaks them. You don't fight their logic, you replace it. You don't argue, you reveal, and every time you do, something collapses inside them. You see, people can defend against anger, they can fight noise, but they are powerless against clarity. Especially when it walks in calm, sits at the table and says nothing while watching them sweat. That's your superpower. You turned awareness into ammunition. Now they call you dangerous, not because you're violent, but because you know where all the switches are, and they don't even know what building you're standing in. Every manipulator, every liar, every coward who thought they buried their sins deep enough, they feel your presence like sonar. You walk in and the guilt ripples. They search for what you know, but they can't trace the wire. Because you didn't just witness the past, you stored it. You built a library of behaviors, a collection of tells, betrayals, patterns of decay. You became the human lie detector, the conscience with fangs. And the moment they realize that you're not bluffing, that you actually remember what they hoped was forgotten, it breaks them. Not loudly, quietly, like mold behind drywall. And just like that, their voice gets softer, their tone gets careful, their eyes stop meeting yours, because now they wonder, what else did you catch? The beauty is you never needed to expose them. You let time do that. You let their own contradictions detonate on schedule. That's the most lethal thing about you. You know that no lie survives when exposed to repetition, so you let them repeat themselves in different rooms, to different people, until their web collapses. You didn't need revenge, you had recordings. Not in tech, in memory. And memory paired with pattern recognition, that's lethal. You've made entire people unravel just by remembering accurately. While they gaslit, you archived. While they laughed, you highlighted. You didn't have to punish them, you just let them be seen. That's why you're feared. Because your power doesn't wear a crown. It wears a smirk. A smirk that says, "Try me. I dare you." You don't even raise your voice, you raise doubt. In their minds, in their allies, in their narratives. You drop one sentence, and suddenly, they're rewriting their stories, second-guessing their choices, panicking about conversations they thought were forgotten. You're not dangerous because you attack, you're dangerous because you know. And there's no firewall for that. No apology can undo your awareness. No manipulation works on someone who's already seen the ending. You terrify them because your silence suggests there's more, and they can't guess how much. You are the unsolvable equation, the cipher that reconfigures itself. They want to figure you out, but there is no map, no origin, no confession, because you were built from fragments, from betrayal, from repetition, from watching people trade morality for approval. You learned how to spot the moment someone chose survival over integrity, and now you see it everywhere. That's what they fear, that you see them, the real them, not the curated one. And you don't flinch, you don't run, you just nod, like a surgeon looking at an X-ray of a shattered soul, already planning the incision. They can't kill what they can't find, and they can't find why you know what you know. That's why they whisper your name like a curse. That's why they send others to test you, to fish for what you'll reveal. But you've long stopped explaining. Your knowledge isn't public domain. It's leverage. You own your awareness now. You guard it like a weapon. Because in a world that depends on ignorance, the one who knows without ever showing his source rules quietly, permanently, unapologetically. And that is the essence of power. They hate how accurate you are. It's not the words themselves, it's the way they land. You don't fumble through thoughts, you thread needles through hearts. And every time you open your mouth, they're reminded that you've been paying attention longer than they've been pretending. Your statements feel less like conversation and more like autopsies, done while they're still breathing. You speak in a tone that carries no hesitation, no fluff, no wandering intellect that needs validation. When you talk, it's like a scalpel slipping through layers of ego, peeling away projection and laying raw truth out on the table. There's no tremble in your voice, because you're not guessing, you're reporting. That's the difference. You don't need the facts to align, you are the alignment. They assume you're bluffing, until you're not. Until you name something no one mentioned. Until you point at a detail they forgot they dropped. Until your words stitch together years of their hidden dysfunction with a surgeon's hand and the elegance of a final verdict. You don't just speak with precision, you speak with evidence that never had to be written. You don't threaten, you foreshadow. And it paralyzes them because they don't know how much you know, and more dangerously, they can't tell how you know. You could be listening to their silence. You could be reading their posture. You could be recalling something they said offhand 2 years ago that you dissected in private. Whatever the source, the result is the same. Devastation cloaked in calm. They want to believe it's luck, that you're making educated guesses, that you stumbled onto the truth. But you don't miss, you never have, because you never aimed at the obvious. You learned long ago that people expose themselves in what they defend, what they justify, what they refuse to speak about. So that's where you look. Not at their eyes, but at the silence behind them. Not at their actions, but at the moments they choose not to act. You map their loyalties by watching who they protect when the room turns cold. You decode their fears by noticing what jokes they avoid. You've learned to predict behavior by studying the spaces in between. And when you speak, you're not reacting, you're executing. They feel naked around you, not because you've seen their worst, but because you've understood it. And worse, you didn't flinch. You didn't recoil in horror or sympathy. You analyzed it. You picked it apart like a biologist studying the remains of a failed species. That's what makes you dangerous. Your empathy was never emotional, it was forensic. You didn't develop insight to heal them. You developed it to protect yourself, to survive, to outmaneuver, to never again be caught off guard by charming chaos or eloquent evil. You became the one who listens for the lie before it's even spoken, who spots the shift in breath before the betrayal arrives. You're not intuitive, you're trained. They can't trace your training because there was no mentor, no manual. Your education was brutality. Betrayal was your classroom, manipulation was your textbook. Gaslighting was the pop quiz you passed by memorizing the emotional climate of liars. And now, you're the one grading the room. You enter spaces where people used to feel confident in their deception, and within minutes they shrink, because they feel it. The way you observe without blinking. The way your silence suggests you're building a case, not waiting to respond. And when you finally do speak, it's never long-winded, it's surgical. One sentence that collapses their entire facade. One phrase that connects the dots they thought were buried under charm and distance. They can't tell if you're reading their soul or just guessing well, and that's the genius of your presence. You've blurred the line between instinct and intelligence so thoroughly that they stop trying to separate the two. They begin to censor themselves around you. They second-guess their stories. They clean up their lies with extra polish, unaware that the polish itself gives them away. You make people expose their own guilt by offering them no place to hide. You don't accuse, you notice. And in a world where people rely on plausible deniability, your precision is fatal. You turn rooms into confessionals without raising your voice. Just standing there, quietly slicing the narrative to pieces. You don't speak to be heard, you speak to dismantle. Each word is measured like a blade meant to cut only what's infected. You don't waste time with explanations or arguments, you dissect. And that's why they call you cold. But they confuse cold with controlled. You've simply removed your emotions from the equation because you've seen how emotions become entry points for liars. You've sealed those doors. And now, when you speak, it's not for connection, it's for correction. A subtle verbal autopsy of all the lies that walked in wearing perfume and practiced smiles. They scramble for your source because if they could name it, they could copy it. But your source isn't something they can mimic, because it wasn't learned in books or bestowed by teachers. It was forged in betrayal, built in silence, refined by solitude, and weaponized by necessity. They don't realize you became this way because no one protected you. So you became the protector, not just of yourself, but of truth. That's why your words sting. Not because they're cruel, but because they're calibrated to remove illusion. You speak with the finality of someone who's already buried their former self, and now walks as both witness and weapon. They try to warn others about you. Careful, they're too sharp. Don't trust them, they'll expose you. But what they're really saying is, this one sees through me. You are the mirror that doesn't flatter, the reflection they avoid, and still they return, because part of them wants to be seen, wants someone to call it out, wants someone to end the performance. And when you do, when your voice lands like a scalpel in the fabric of their lie, they act wounded. But secretly, they're relieved, because for once, someone didn't let the illusion win. That's what your precision does. It doesn't just destroy lies, it liberates people from them. And now, they sit in rooms rehearsing their lines, editing their personas, managing their performance, all for you. Because they know that if they say the wrong word, pause the wrong way, blink too slowly, or breathe too shallow, they'll reveal something you can use. And they're right. You're listening for the pattern, always. And once you catch it, you won't explode. You'll whisper. One line, one observation, and suddenly, everything they built shatters under the weight of being accurately seen. Because when you speak, it's not luck. It's too precise, too surgical, too devastating, too you. They flinch when you enter, not because of your voice, not even your presence, but because they know you didn't just arrive. You've been there already, in the cracks of their behavior, in the unfinished thoughts they muttered when no one was supposed to be listening, in the excuses they rehearsed in the mirror, and the energy they tried to mask with pleasantries. You don't walk into a room. You arrive with knowledge. You step across thresholds as if you were summoned by their guilt, like some ancient force that only shows up when deceit reaches a certain density. And by the time you're seated, it's already too late for them to rearrange their stories. You've already read the truth hanging in the corners of their eyes. You don't ask questions. You confirm suspicions. And your silence, that's not awkward. That's suspense. They hate how your presence rearranges the atmosphere. Conversations falter, smiles become stiff, people suddenly remember unfinished tasks or take too long to sip their drinks. Because you don't just hear words, you hear what isn't said. You're fluent in the language of omission. You don't respond to the content. They could say anything and you'd still be listening to tone, watching their hands, feeling the tension behind their jokes. You arrive like a phantom verdict, already knowing which lie they'll reach for first. And that's why they can't enjoy your company. Because every sentence around you becomes a test, and no one wants to fail in front of someone who never had to study to know the answer. You built this ability in silence, not through study, but survival. You learned early that words are currency in a world full of counterfeiters. You stopped believing what people said and started measuring what they couldn't hide: their energy, their inconsistencies, their instinct to over-explain or underreact. And the more you watched, the more you knew, until eventually you didn't need to dig anymore. The truths began walking to you. And now you can sit in a room full of polished reputations and you'll feel the rot beneath them without anyone opening their mouth. Because their guilt walks ahead of them. Unaware, you can smell it before they even take their seat. You make people nervous not because you accuse, but because you see. And what you see, you don't unsee. You catalog it. You remember it. You let it ferment until the moment it becomes useful. And when it does, you don't throw it like a grenade. No. You place it gently in front of them, like a mirror, letting them look at what they pretended wasn't there. And that kind of confrontation, it doesn't require volume. It requires accuracy, which is why you terrify them. Because they know you didn't guess. You knew. And they don't know when that knowledge began or how much of it you've already weaponized. You didn't study psychology for this, but you became a master of it by necessity. You learned that shame has a smell, that guilt changes posture, that deception has a rhythm, that someone who's hiding something always hesitates right before they try to laugh it off. You walk into rooms with this knowledge, not because you're trying to catch anyone. You're just used to paying attention. The kind of attention no one expects. The kind that doesn't announce itself but quietly gathers evidence. You let people hang themselves with their own words, not by entrapment, but by simply allowing them to speak. They think they're good at hiding until you show up. Then their tricks begin to feel outdated, their tactics too transparent. They try to maintain control, but your presence steals it without effort. Because they don't know what you've already seen, what you've already decided. And when they ask something casual, something innocent, and you pause, they feel it. That split second where your silence wraps around their spine like a question they never wanted to hear, they feel the weight of your observations pressing against the lies they've been living in. And they start to sweat, not because you're loud, but because your accuracy has no origin they can trace. You didn't become like this by chance. You were forced into it, made to listen when you wanted to speak, made to watch when you wanted to trust. And over time, you became the kind of person who walks into a room armed with truth. Not the sanitized kind, but the kind that makes people uncomfortable, the kind that disorients the curated. You became the one who doesn't look at people's faces, but through them. And now they try to hide behind humor, status, and distraction, but none of it shields them from you, because you arrive with X-ray vision, not of the body, but of the soul. They talk about you when you leave. How do they always know? I feel like they saw right through me. And they're not wrong. You did. You always do. Because by the time you walk in, you've already triangulated the emotional temperature of the entire room. You've already mapped out the alliances, the quiet tensions, the suppressed agendas. You carry this knowledge like a silent briefcase, never opened unless necessary, but everyone knows it's there. That's the tension. That's the power. You don't boast. You don't warn. You just observe. And when you do speak, it's surgical. Each word a scalpel. Each pause a strategy. Each glance an execution. You never asked for the syllabus. You didn't wait to be taught. You simply watched. And from the angles others ignored, you built your architecture. A blueprint not scribbled in textbooks, but carved from raw silence. They think power requires guidance, that mastery must be handed down, formalized, sanctioned by someone in a robe or a suit. But you learn differently. You didn't learn by being told. You learned by noticing. Noticing who glanced too quickly, who smiled too long, who avoided mirrors. Your classroom wasn't a room. It was the world. Your teacher? Absence. And your grades? Measured in survival, adaptation, precision. They were trained to think linearly, step 1, step 2, step 3. You weren't. You saw the finish line while they were still searching for the map. Because your mind doesn't operate like theirs. You don't assemble truth. You extract it. Not from facts, but from fractures. From the way a conversation dips when certain topics are touched. From how someone suddenly becomes louder when they're insecure. From how someone changes their breathing when they're preparing a lie. You see through, not because you're magical, but because you never looked at things. You looked through them. That's what makes you terrifying. They mistake you for intuitive, as if your precision comes from some unexplainable hunch. But it's not intuition, it's data. Pure, unspoken, psychological data. Gathered not in loud rooms, but in still ones. You didn't wait to be handed information. You studied the fallout of unspoken truths. That's why you're steps ahead. They can't trace your reasoning because it never left footprints. You don't announce your process. You don't diagram your deductions. You simply arrive at the answer, fully formed, as if the truth whispered to you in private. And maybe it did. Maybe the silence spoke louder to you than any instruction manual ever could. They spent years being taught what to think. You trained yourself to understand why people avoid thinking at all. You didn't need a mentor. You had pain. You had betrayal. You had loneliness so deep it echoed back truths no one dared say out loud. That solitude became your university. And while others were taught by experts, you were being shaped by reality, raw and unedited. So now you walk into rooms and spot patterns they don't even see. You watch conversations like chess games, tracking the moves they didn't know they were making, and when you respond, it sounds like prophecy. But it's just clarity. Earned the hard way. They don't understand how you're so accurate without instruction. But that's because their minds are wired for external validation. You don't need that. Your mind reverse engineers reality. You hear the lie before it's spoken, because you've heard the truth fail to arrive too many times. You see fear dressed up as confidence, because you once had to survive among wolves while appearing docile. You see the glitch in someone's story, not because you're suspicious, but because you learned to track tremors in trust. You learn the cost of misreading intent. And now, you never misread twice. They follow paths, you follow patterns. They listen to voices, you listen to tone. And when they gather evidence, you already have the conclusion, not from a spreadsheet, but from watching how their pupils dilated when pressure was applied, from how they folded their arms when the topic neared guilt. You don't extract logic from lessons. You form it from friction. The tension between what's said and what's suppressed, that's your language, and it's one they'll never speak, because they were too busy memorizing rules to understand the game.